U.S. federal law defines human trafficking as the use of force, fraud, or coercion to compel a person into commercial sex acts or labor against their will. I'm Penny Ronning, and I'm the daughter of a trafficking survivor. In 2016, along with Stephanie Bacchus, I co-founded the Yellowstone Human Trafficking Task Force with the FBI and the United States Attorney's Office in Montana. Join us as we throw back the curtains and shine light on the dark world of modern-day slavery. In this podcast, we expose traffickers and buyers, discuss difficult subjects, and find solutions to end this crime of violence. Turn up the volume, the gloves are off, it's time to talk trafficking. Today our guest is survivor, leader, and advocate Jenna McKaye. We'll be talking with Jenna about the healing journey she went on to overcome trafficking and other traumas and what she still does today for healing work. We'll also be talking with her about what we need more of in the anti-trafficking field, both nationally and in smaller communities. And Jenna was a champion of California Senate Bill 14. We're going to talk with her about the challenges she faced and what she learned in the legislative process. Join us today with Jenna McKaye. Welcome, Jenna McKaye. It is so good to have you here today. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me. I'm so grateful to be here.
Absolutely. Jenna, share with our listeners the parts of your story you are comfortable sharing, your healing journey, and what you do to actively stay on your healing path.
Yeah. So, kind of to give the brief version of my story, I grew up in Southern California, went to a private school, and was headed to play college volleyball. And I was lured out of high school my senior year by a man I met in high school. He graduated a year before me. He wasn't already a trafficker, but he was involved in a lot of criminal activity. Long story short, he married me. I never refer to him. If you hear me talking in my story, maybe one time you may hear me refer to him as my husband, but I refer to him as my trafficker. Husband is giving him way too much credit. That's what he was, a trafficker. And marrying me was just another tool he used to kind of keep me in place and control me. He, through other criminal activity that he was involved in, learned about trafficking, and he sold me out of our apartment just down the street from my private Christian school, not far from my parents where they lived. And it wasn't every night or weekend. This just happened over the course of a year. The last time was in a motel in the same town. I got away after that. It really scared me. It was the most horrific time that I was sold. When I got away, I went to an urgent care seeking help. I was 100 pounds. I had a branding. I had various stages of bruising, acted erratic. My hair was falling out. All these signs that I'd not just been through trafficking, but trauma. And everyone was talking around me and nobody was talking to me. And all I needed in that moment was somebody to say, Jenna, what happened to you? And then to follow that up with, we have resources and people that will help you. Law enforcement that will take care of him. And there's social workers, victim advocates, safe houses, things for you that will help you in your path. I would have been like, sign me up. I mean, I just know I've thought this over in my head thousands of times. If somebody had said to me, you may not go back and play volleyball at a school that you thought you were going to, but you could go into junior college, take some classes and play volleyball there. I would have been like, how do I do that? And then how do I start the healing journey? But I left with nothing, no questions asked, no resources given. And so I thought I just tried to navigate life best I could, which was coping with all of that trauma in really unhealthy ways. Eventually marrying a Marine, getting stationed on the other side of the country, which felt like freedom. But that undiagnosed trauma was still in me. And I had a son. I thought I was doing pretty good. I would have uncomfortable feelings like anxiety, depression, flashbacks, nightmares, but I just really became a professional at keeping that inside and just wanted to live my normal life that I was creating. And then 6 years after being trafficked, I had a breakdown after a doctor examined me and asked me some questions. It was in a psychiatric hospital in art therapy that I came out with what happened and was diagnosed with complex PTSD and found out that what I had survived was human trafficking. And then I started my healing journey. Eventually got out and went through a horrible divorce, was a single mom working multiple jobs in Southern California. And at that time, I had a little bit of therapy, but I leased a horse on the base that was my therapy. Like anytime I wasn't working, which felt like all the time, I was riding that horse. And I grew up with horses, so it's always been a therapy of mine. And then when I moved here to Northern California to pursue this work in 2016, I recognized a couple years in that I was having a lot of triggers and anxiety, and sometimes really small things, comments that people would say would like upset me. And I was like, what? I need more work to be done. Because here's the thing is, I thought, okay, I went to the hospital, I had some therapy, I came out with what happened, I'm living a normal life, I'm good. Well, it was good enough just to pretend to be okay and to be living a normal life, but to be authentic, that needed more healing. And I started with my therapist in 2020. I've been with her every week, sometimes twice a week for 4 years, really diving into the therapy. And the thing is, when I share about therapy, it's of course about the traumas I've experienced and when I was a victim and heartbreaks and other traumas that I've been through and dealing with those. But it's also about becoming a better person and diving into things that I don't love about myself. And, I might want to change this about myself. And that's who I really want to be. And how do I get there? And getting the tools, that complex PTSD, even though it's much more managed now with all the work, there's still triggers that come up where, let's say something used to trigger me and I'd be on the couch for 2 days, unable to just calm myself. Now I have tools within minutes. I can be good and I can go about my day without it totally interrupting my life. So that's one of the things, is working with my therapist, really doing the hard work every week. I see her again tomorrow. The other thing I do is ACA recovery. I'm in a 12-step program. I'm on step 10. I have a sponsor. I go to the meetings online and some in person. My trauma often comes to me in the middle of the night. So sometimes it's jumping on a meeting at 2 a.m. in Norway or Australia or anywhere, just in a community. And what I really love about the meetings is there's no crosstalk, there's no tissue, pats on the back, or giving advice. It's you have 3 minutes to share whatever you want to talk about, and then that's it. Then it's you were heard, and then it's on to the next person. No person's trauma is greater than somebody else's or is worse. Everybody's equal and everybody's trauma is equal, and we're all on our own healing journeys. And that feels amazing. The other things I do every summer, I go on with Logos Wilderness Therapy based out of Colorado. I've gone 3 times already. I'm going to go this summer for my 4th trip. And it's out in the wilderness, no cell service. The first 2 days, I was like, nobody can call me. And the 3rd day, I was like, wow, the world goes on just fine without me. And it allows me to be completely present in my healing for the days I'm there. I hike mountains. It's really hard. Physically, there's a lot of challenges. Mentally, there's challenges, but we're doing different kinds of therapies in the wild, which I always feel peace outside wherever I am. And you're with a group of women, you're with therapists, and you're with a group of women that are healing as well. And when women get together, it's been my experience, really cool things happen, especially if we're all supporting each other and wanting the best for each other. And then in 2020, I went to an ashram in Texas to learn how to meditate from monks. And that, I hope to go back someday, was truly a shift. It happened in me. Truly being with myself, not having distractions, but totally being present, which is hard to do. It's kind of like what Julia Roberts experienced in Eat, Pray, Love, like looking at the clock, like, oh my gosh, I've only been here 2 minutes, and having to sit with yourself. It's like, woo, because I keep my mind and I do everything to distract myself, and to really be with myself and be comfortable with the uncomfortable. And it's a practice. I admit I don't do it every day, and I should, but when I do it, my day's way better. And just, my healing is a part-time job, and it's something I'll do for the rest of my life. And that used to feel a little bit like a burden. Like, oh man, it's not fair. You kind of go into victim mode. All these things happen to me, and now I have to do all this work. Now it feels like a relief. Now it's like there's no ending line. I get to do this forever. So there's no finishing point. I'll always be healing and I'll always be doing the work and just keep improving in all the ways I can. And that feels so good.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Oh, you had so much in there that I loved so much of what you said. And I want to touch on a few of the points. First of all, let's share with our audience. You said a key word that traffickers often do, branding. Let's share with our audience what that is. And I'm assuming for you that you were tattooed. Was that correct? Mm-hmm. Okay. So branding typically means a tattoo of some kind. And I know that when I do training, and probably when you do training also, especially with law enforcement or firefighters or medical personnel, ambulance attendants, EMTs, that we tell them to look for very specific kinds of tattoos that could be a signal that this is a trafficking victim that you're working with. So let's touch on that just for a moment so our listeners know and become educated on what maybe they should be looking for. I know the things that we say in Montana, what we're seeing more of are dollar signs, money bags. We see crowns, we see daddy's girl, we see the name of the trafficker. We see different things that would really be a symbol of possible ownership. Yeah. Is that what you typically suggest when you do training, or do you see something different in California? Because you're in California now. And so do you see something different in your state?
Well, I'll start with my own, and then I'll share what I've seen working with victims. But I would like to preface that my trafficker was just getting started. He was really, I don't know how to say it, new to the trafficking, right? Hadn't already trafficked other girls. He didn't traffic other girls with me. And this is something he just learned. So he, somewhere along the line, learned that this is something he should do. So, thankfully he didn't put anything where I normally see it, like above the eyebrow, on the neck, on the chest. He put it on my lower back. But he took me, there was first a trip to Vegas, which I think is where he kind of learned about the situation, learned about what to do and how to sell somebody. And then he took me to Tijuana, Mexico. And there was a tattoo artist in the lobby area of a club there. And this wasn't like, woohoo, we're getting a drink and we're going to get tattoos. This was very forced, very traumatic. This is something where if I had been educated in high school, this is where a big red flag would have gone off as, ooh, I learned about this. He's about to do something really bad. He has other intentions for me. I really was kind of like, I knew I was surviving domestic violence. I didn't know it was domestic violence because my idea of domestic violence was beating.
Right.
He was doing domestic violence like financially, emotionally, taking the cell phone, taking the car keys, separating me from my support system. All these things were in place already. I knew I was uncomfortable, but I didn't realize like he had other plans for me. And this was the start of it. And so it was so forced, and he was putting things in my mouth, and I kept telling the guy to stop. And he kept going, like he was in on it with him. And so I didn't know that I was being branded for trafficking. I just knew it was really traumatic and uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. And then when we returned home to our apartment, not long after is when he started selling me. So he put a tattoo of his name on my lower back. And what I've seen, I remember going down to Riverside County, the victim, I was taking her to a safe house. And like I said, she had tattoos, brandings here and on her neck. But I've seen them everywhere where some girls have had them on the inside of their lips. I remember doing a training in New Jersey, and an ER doctor came up to me and he said that he had to do a full evaluation, an exam on a girl, and she had a tattoo in her private parts. And he was like, I thought it was weird, but I had no idea. Now I recognize with other signs that she showed, he had let a trafficking victim go through his ER room without him saying anything. And so, I mean, I think it's similar everywhere where it is like the gang signs. It's the, money signs, the crowns, the names, anything like that.
Yeah. That's what we see also, is that the signage, and placement and all of the things that you've described is pretty universal when it comes to domestic trafficking. You bring up such key points. Why should a person think something's happening when it's a family member? Mm-hmm. You shouldn't be thinking and shouldn't have to be thinking this person has a harmful intent for you because it's a family member. But in the United States, domestic human trafficking, the first time a victim is trafficked, it is predominantly by a family member. That's one of those myths that we work really hard to break, that it's not the white creepy van. Typically is going to be someone that the victim knows, loves, and trusts. Some of the other things that you said, the second point that I wanted to bring about, you said it so beautifully. Had someone asked you when you were receiving medical care, had someone asked you questions? Had someone provided you with information? Had someone educated you that there were resources to help you, you would have taken them. I think that's one of the things that is confusing to many people as to why don't victims say something? Well, oftentimes they're not given the opportunity to.
Yeah.
And they don't know who to trust.
Right. Yeah. Well, and I was just going to add to that is two things. First of all, not knowing who to trust hits the point, because I was told I was going off of, I had no education around this. I didn't know what they would do with the information. So I was going off of what he told me. And I had experiences that reaffirmed it. Law enforcement, it's not going to help you. You're going to be in trouble if you tell law enforcement. I was arrested and shamed by a police officer. What if they sat me down and first said, asked me some questions, and then said what would happen to me, and then what is the process going to be? Because the victim's thinking, what's going to happen to me? What are you going to do with me? Where am I going to go? I'll talk more if you lay out the plan and say, this is how it works with law enforcement and the judicial system. This is how it works. We're going to do some exams on you, and this is the advocate that's going to come for you. This is how it's going to look long-term and the help you'll receive, the victim's compensation fund, the exam, everything that you need. I needed somebody to lay that out for me. And when we ask victims, well, why didn't you just run? Why didn't you just call for help? What the victim hears, because I remember when I first started sharing my story, I get those kinds of questions, and I'd get in my car and just start crying, and I'd get pissed. And I thought a lot about it, and I go, oh, I'm so angry, is because I'm not hearing why didn't you? I'm hearing, as the victim and survivor, you should have. This is your fault. You should have called 911. You should have ran away. You should have gone home.
Yep.
He didn't, even when he gave me an option, this is a perfect example. Halfway through that year, he opened the front door to the apartment, and he said, Jenna, leave. If you hate me so much and you hate this so much, you're free to go. And I started to walk out the front door, and then I stopped and I went, where? And he knew exactly what he was doing in that moment, because I really thought I didn't have anywhere to go, even though I did. And that's a young, very immature, traumatized 18-year-old brain really doing every choice I made was out of survival mode.
Yeah.
And, there's the fight, flight, or freeze. And there's a fourth one that nobody really talks about, which is appease. And I was so scared of him, and I just wanted it to stop, that I just would kind of not be myself of who I am now. Who I was then was, I'm scared. I'll do whatever you want to keep the peace.
Yeah. So true. So true. And I love the point you made about how a victim's going to receive certain things that are being said. And it really does come down to all of us becoming educated on what this crime looks like, on what it looks like from a victim's perspective, on what it looks like from a trafficker's perspective, the buyer's perspective, someone on the outside looking in. And so much of this has to do with education. And I love that you are educating yourself on how to become the person you want to be. That's really the job of all of us, isn't it? Whether we've been victimized by a violent crime, or we've been an incredibly successful person in business, or we're just an astonishing housekeeper, not me. It's one of those things that in life, we all really have that job of who is it we want to be. You're doing that work on figuring out who it is you want to be through the filter and the mire of what comes with PTSD and what comes with being a victim of a violent crime. So you've got that on top of it. One of the things that I think gets put on survivors within the anti-trafficking world is the importance of a survivor's voice, which we're going to get to in a moment. But sometimes I think we often expect survivors to go from, okay, victim here, now you're out, and time has passed. Well, surely you're better now.
Yeah.
Not every victim and not every survivor knows how to get help, knows how to tell their story to a professional therapist, to a friend. There's often that level of shame that stays with a survivor for a long period of time, and they don't know how to break out of that. How did you find that place of healing and the therapist that you found trust with? How did you find that?
Well, it first started in the psychiatric hospital when I had a routine doctor's appointment and I had basically a panic attack during a pelvic exam. I had been to the doctor plenty of times. I'd given birth. Nobody ever said anything. This doctor did. And she pulled me in her office after and she said, Jenna, have you ever been sexually abused? This was 6 years after when I appeared as a normal, happy, healthy mom and military wife. When I went to the doctor looking the way I did, nobody said anything. And that shook me. I was like, it was like she was uncovering the secret that I had. And it's not like I came out and said, yes, when I was 18, all these horrible things happened. I need help. But by identifying me and asking the questions, she stirred things up. And my PTSD was like, whew. And that led to a breakdown, which led to going to the emergency room and then eventually the psychiatric hospital. Now, it's a really long story. And I was there a few days and got out and was sent home with medicine and had an overdose after a really bad nightmare. So was back in the emergency room being treated and then went back to the inpatient care. And there was this woman that from my first visit in group therapy, I had heard some of the things that had happened to her. And some of them were similar to mine. And she was sitting in the corner of the room and she had her arms wrapped around her and she was rocking back and forth like this. And it was like nobody was there. And I remember thinking, if I don't get this out of me, I'm going to end up like her or dead. The next therapy was art therapy. And she said to draw what we were afraid of. And she said, you can put it in your binder or you can share it with everybody. And I held up my picture of stick figure men and said, when I was 18, I was married to someone and he had men come to the apartment and they raped me and then they gave him money for it. And I don't know what that means, but I'm afraid of men. Whew, the truth will set you free in a psych ward with barbed wire around it that I could not leave on my own free will. First real sense of freedom. And then what happened was this team stepped in. And there was a therapist that had a huge impact on me, but really this case manager that I had, I remember, I hope I can find him someday and thank him. A little redheaded guy, his office had degrees all over the wall, framed all over. And the thing is, when my trauma was coming out, by this point I had found out that I had survived trafficking and I had complex PTSD. I wasn't the little girl with the teddy bear that you wanted to pick up and hold. I was 18-year-old, angry, just traumatized and so angry about what he had done to me and reliving all the things he had done to me, things I thought I pushed down that I would never remember again. And so when I'd go into his office, I'd cuss and yell and throw my arms about and I'd say, you're never going to help me. I'm going to be here. I'm going to lose my husband and my son. And I'm going to be in this place forever. There's nothing you can do. You have no idea how bad it was. There's nothing anybody can do for me. And the whole time I was looking out the corner of my eye, watching him because if I saw any sense of judgment on his face, I was not going, then I really wasn't going to receive help from him. And all I ever saw was concern, compassion, understanding, and eagerness to help. Everything about him, his body language, his facial expressions, how he talked to me. And it wasn't the first time that I was like, okay, yes. But after I'd go in and throw my temper tantrum every time, he asked me, he's like, Jenna, do you want to make a plan together? And by this point, he had earned not only my trust, but my respect. And I said, yes, I do want to make a plan with you. And that's what started wanting to do. I really, to the point where I kept myself there. And that was a scary place. I mean, padded rooms, all the things. And I kept myself there away from my husband and my son to do the work.
Yeah.
And then when I realized when I started doing this work and I need to see a therapist, I was connected to Carol, who's a sexual trauma therapist. I will never forget our first session. She said, there's other therapists. If you don't feel like this is a good fit, I already knew that first session. I was like, you're the one for me. Yeah. The movie Titanic, when the older Rose is talking about Jack to all the crew members on the ship. And she says this line, he saved me in every way a woman can be saved. Well, that's how I feel about Carol. Yeah. Yeah. Like Carol has done the work on me and has helped me become that person and really work through my trauma. She taught me how it's in my nervous system. She did an art therapy exercise where we worked through that trauma. I had no idea. You don't know what you don't know. And she's taught me so much about myself, and it's allowed me to heal.
Yeah. Some people are really called into their profession, aren't they?
Oh, yes.
And I just love the folks that you described. Those people were called into their profession. And you touched on some things we talked about before we started the recording, and all of the things we're learning about trauma and how trauma impacts our emotional being, our spiritual being, mental being, how it impacts DNA. We've been talking about that. And I'm so glad that you've got those folks that are surrounding you. You have been a champion on so many different levels, Jenna, as a survivor advocate. And one of those biggest calls for you came this past year when you helped to champion the California State Legislature's Senate Bill 14, a bill that would include sex trafficking of a minor in the lists of crimes that are defined as serious under California law, making a crime a strike under the 3 strikes law. First of all, thank you. That is tough work. Thank you. Second, I'm sure it's as shocking for you as it is for me to understand and be aware and learn that we still have states in our country that do not recognize the sexual trafficking of a child as a serious enough crime to be considered the most violent of crimes. That's shocking and stunning to me. Third, please share with us your experience in advocating for California Senate Bill 14 and what you learned about the legislative process.
Oh my gosh, I got emotional as you said that because it's so wild. It was such a whirlwind, first of all, when it was passed, and I got to be there when the governor signed it into law. And it was 2 years of trying to get this thing passed, and it had been tried before. And I really felt it when I was down in Southern California. I was speaking to 500 7th and 8th graders, and I was up there to talk about the bill and passing it. And that's when it felt real, being in front of the kids. I got emotional because I was like, wow, this is going to protect them, because traffickers are going to be locked up and not pursuing them. And they're vulnerable and an easy target. And that's when it felt so real, and I felt so grateful. But I was approached when it was SB 1042, and I didn't know anything about, I never worked in legislation. I really don't know much about how laws are passed, the process, anything about it. And I'll say his name just because he's had a huge impact on me. He's a deputy DA with Santa Barbara District Attorney's Office, Tyson McCoy, and he wrote the legislation with Senator Grove's office. And he approached me, had heard about me, and I was referred to him. And I was like, yeah, I'll help out how I can. And I like speaking, and I'm comfortable sharing my story. And then I couldn't get enough. And I I talked about things I can do besides showing up to press conferences and besides, standing in front of the senators and sharing and advocating, getting signatures on the petition, getting endorsements and letters of support. And I was calling everybody all the way to the UN, getting all this, anything I could do. And in the meantime, on the side of that was taking phone calls from mothers whose daughters had been trafficked. And I was like, whoa, this is like all really happening around me. And we're trying to do this work and the victims are needing it. It didn't make it past the Public Safety Committee, the first committee with SB 1042. And that felt like a gut punch because this work is, it's professionalism and it's doing the work, but it's always personal, I think, to everybody because it's a human subject and it's personal too when you're a survivor. And it felt like to me, they said no to me. And that took a lot of wrapping my head around and kind of, how do we do this? This can't be. And then Senator Grove, who's amazing and just really truly genuinely cares. I can feel it from her and her entire staff, just really cares and wants this for victims. She brought back SB 14, and what they had to do was amend it to those that traffic minors only. And she heard from me how irritating that was to me. And I told her, I said, look, I was still in high school, but I had a birthday in December. So I would have been graduating that June, but I turned 18 and I was already being trafficked by the time all my classmates were graduating. I was still a child, but by law, I was considered an adult. And if I had gone to trial and my attorney came to me and said, hey, Jenna, you had a birthday, so he's going to get lesser sentence. What I hear again is your trauma doesn't matter. And I didn't care, if I was 18 or 50, that is a serious trauma to survive. And justice should be served for that victim. That's huge in the healing process. And so we are still going to work on that. We just have a long way to go. People don't understand force, fraud, and coercion. They think when you're 18, you're able to consent. They don't understand how human trafficking works. But we did pass, for minors, and that was a huge success. And it will, when Tyson talked to me about it, he's like, Jenna, this isn't just giving justice to those that survived it. This is protecting all those kids. And so that was just such a big accomplishment, And then now what we're working on currently is SB 1414, which will be going after the buyers, harsher penalties. Right now, it's just a misdemeanor in California. If you buy a child for sex, this is going to make them have to register as a sex offender for up to 30 years, pay up to a $25,000 fine, up to 4 years in jail. I mean, the thing is, when I thought about it and shared with Senator Grove, I said, these guys that go out and buy children for sex, they don't want their wives and their children and their jobs and their communities to know. That's embarrassing. They lose a lot more than if they just have to pay a little fine and kind of sweep it under the rug. They need to be exposed. And that will hopefully prevent many children from being bought because people are afraid of that.
Yeah, absolutely. This past year in 2023 in the Montana State Legislature, we did get passed that the first offense of buying commercial sex, period, adult or minor, doesn't matter, it's a felony. Second state in the country to get that passed. But Jenna, that took us 7-8 years of working on that and getting folks to understand that the focus needs to be on demand, needs to be on the buyer, and that we need to have greater laws, bigger laws that go after the fuel of the trafficking trade, which is the buyer and his demand. It's shocking to me also that you and I are having this conversation in 2024, that legislators, both at the federal level and in our state level, don't understand trafficking yet enough to understand that a victim is typically not sold once a day, and that, there may or may not have been consent because they don't understand the force, fraud, or coercion. But even the word consent, that's a legal term. There's a big difference between consent and mutuality. Huge difference between consent and mutuality. Not everyone that consents has mutual sexual attraction or wants to be in an intimate engagement with that other human being. That consent can come for a variety of different reasons. So there's a big, big difference between consent and mutuality. But also in trafficking and even in prostitution, there's often, especially if there's a pimp and a trafficker involved, there's a quota, a financial quota that needs to be met. And so we're talking someone is victimized through rape multiple times a day. And yet we still have legislators that don't see that as violent enough to be considered a serious crime for the 3 strikes, even if it's an adult. This should not be taking us so long to get this across to legislators and policymakers in our country, but it is. And champions like you are out there educating nonstop. And I know I watch you on Facebook. You and I are friends on Facebook. So I see where you go and how many people you talk to. You are a great educator, and education is obviously key in reducing and ending what I think is one of the most egregious crimes on the planet, and that is the sale of another human being, whether it be for forced labor or sexual violence and sexual acts that are never about consent. But the survivor's voice is critical in this fight against human trafficking. It is. From your unique perspective, what is it that we need more of in the anti-trafficking field nationally and in our smaller communities?
I agree with the education piece. I think it's 2 things, education and beds. Because once we train all the first responders and they're identifying victims, then we don't have enough places to put them. I'll share my thoughts. This is just my thoughts personally and what I've seen professionally. I think there needs to be a domestic violence shelter and then the human trafficking safe house. There's an amazing safe house I've gone to several times in Monterey, and it's a year-long program. The first 6 months is all different kinds of healing, understanding their trafficking and just healing from that and resting and being safe. And then the second 6 months is continued healing work and also navigating. You know, the one girl I took there was trafficked since she was 11 and she was now 21. She doesn't know basic life skills, like how to get a bank account, how to get her GED. What are her dreams? What does she want to do with her life? How to apply for a job? Does she want to go to college? All these things, cleaning a house, taking care of children, skills that you learn if you're in a somewhat, in a normal life. So, and I've seen the outcome. I mean, she was when I picked her up, very standoffish. You don't know how you can help me. I just want to get away. This isn't going to work. To her branding's covered up. She looks fresh and healthy. Hi, Jenna, how are you? I'm like, whoa, you're a whole new woman. That healing really works, and it's continued. It's not just getting her into a normal life where she's working a normal job that pays her bills, where she's not high risk again to go back into the life because she's financially insecure. So, and then the education piece, if we're not identifying the victims, if they're going for emergency rooms, if they're being approached by law enforcement 8 to 12 times and still don't feel safe enough to come forward, we have an issue here. We need to understand how to be victim-centered and trauma-informed and what that looks like. A detective I work with here who I really admire, when I've seen him talk to victims, he's eye to eye with them. What do you need? Are you hungry? Would you like to sleep? It's obviously he wants to go get the bad guy, but he understands that this girl has been through so much trauma and she may just need some food. Do you want to call your mom? That's usually the point where she starts to tear up and says yes. I've sat through 2 hour interviews where he's interviewing a girl, a victim, and she's having to relive all her trauma, and she starts to get flustered and emotional and she wants a hug. He says, well, let's take a break. Can I get you some water? Just being kind to her, treating her as a human being, not just somebody he has to interview so he can go get an arrest. So being trained, the education piece, and in communities. I mean, we picture so many people. I mean, most of the movies that are made, it's about international trafficking. And it shows what it looks like overseas. Well, the way it looks in the Philippines or Russia, Asia. It's different than what it looks like in New York or Florida or Northern California, in Marysville, a small agriculture community, to San Francisco. It looks completely different because there's different cultures and there's different vulnerabilities of the community. And it's also different vulnerabilities for each individual. And that's what the trafficker is going to go after. You know, I'll share this. I think it was a couple of years ago now. Locally, I went to a local high school football game, which I already knew there'd be triggers just because I knew, you know, just from my own story and being in high school, I have a hard time with high school graduations. There's always those triggers that come up. That's when I was being trafficked the most. And when I was standing in the snack bar line, there was boys that were probably freshman age, and they were looking at pornographic pictures. I mean, this is right in front of me, and they weren't trying to hide it. And then I went and sat down. I was looking around, and the girls in high school, freshmen, you know, to seniors, were dressed very promiscuously. Some of them, I mean, to next level, where it was very uncomfortable and inappropriate. And then the music that was playing by the school, the lyrics are, "I'm going to pimp this," all talking about trafficking and glorifying it. And I sat there and I was feeling it in me. I mean, you probably saw the veins popping out of my neck. And I looked around this packed stadium, teachers, coaches, parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, friends, a bunch of adults, and everybody was having a good old time. And nobody was concerned about what they were seeing and hearing. And I was like, I told my boyfriend, I said, I want to go right now, or somebody needs to hand me a microphone, because I was like, I'm so uncomfortable. That if a trafficker was there with his bottom girl, he would have said, that one, start grooming them. I mean, if we are creating the culture for our children to be exploited and vulnerable and preyed upon, then we're part of the issue. And that's a school. So if we can't recognize and take accountability for that and say, how can we do better? Then we're not going to have improvement.
Spot on. I agree with everything you said. And I see that also here in Montana and the different places that I travel to train. I see that in the schools as well. I see that on social media, see that on television programs, see that in some of my friends' homes. You know, it is there. And a lot of times I do give parents a great deal of grace, because I can't even imagine being a parent of a young child in today's age of the digital world. That is just, it's all consuming of constantly having to stay on top of the next app. We did an interview on this season's episode of the podcast as well with Chris McKenna from Protect Young Eyes. You know, and that's his area of expertise, is the digital world and teaching parents how to protect their children online, because it's terrifying how easily those kids just can, on their phones, on their smartphones, can access online child sexual torture. You know, at any given point in time, any one of us are 2 clicks away from seeing right in front of us on our smartphones live child sexual torture. That's how prevalent it is online right now. And just everything you said, Jenna, spot on. I couldn't agree with you more. For lack of better words, it makes me think of the line out of Batman, you know, this town needs an enema. You know, our culture needs an enema. We need to take some steps back and say, what have we done? You know, and what are we saying is okay? It's not okay. And we keep making it harder for parents to have conversations with kids. We're making it harder for kids just to have a good, healthy childhood.
Right.
Yeah, you touched on so much. And one of the things that you shared for our listeners who are new to anti-trafficking work, you use the language bottom girl. So you and I know what that means. Explain to our listeners what a bottom girl is in trafficking.
Yeah. So, and it's funny, as I was saying that, I almost said recruiter just so people could understand a little better. But bottom girl, usually a trafficker will have one. It's who's been with him or her the longest. And it kind of really takes the new girls that she recruits new girls. She shows them what to do. She'll drive them to destinations, just working directly for the trafficker. And I say that with also, it's important to understand that she is still a victim.
That's right.
She is being victimized.
Yes.
She's been in the life so long. And yes, she's part of the crimes, but she's under her trafficker's control.
Yeah. And she's still just as threatened as the other victims are too.
Yeah.
She knows exactly what will happen to her if she doesn't do the disciplinary actions that she's being required to do, or the actions she's being required to do. One of the survivors that we talked to this season, she's here in Montana, and she's very open about her time as a bottom girl. She was trafficked by Russian mafia here in the United States. And it's a whole other level of trauma that is hard to even comprehend, of what we as human beings force other human beings to do. You know, it really is. And on that note, on this show, we always let our listeners know ways that they can help to combat human trafficking right in their communities. So what are 2 to 3 simple yet key actions people can take this week in their lives or in their communities to help fight human trafficking today, tomorrow, this week?
You know, I agree with all this. Most people will tell you, donate to an organization, support a survivor-led organization, volunteer, host a community event where you have experts come and have a panel, have a survivor speaker, host trainings for your company or for your organization, show up to events, all these different things. There's lots of ways to support human trafficking. You don't have to work directly in the trafficking field. You can simply be the person. You know, when I was being trafficked out of that apartment, I was on the second floor. The people below me, around me, saw men coming and going, had to have heard screams and trauma happening. Nobody picked up the phone and called the police. The difference, if the police came to that door and came in, I could have been saved and had started my healing journey so much sooner. It took 6 years. And then, I'm 18 years out and still healing. And what a hero you have an opportunity to be for somebody by making that phone call. And the excuse, I'm over it. I don't want to be involved. I don't want to be part of it. You can be anonymous and you can save somebody's life. Just being kind when you're being raped and sold every day, having a stranger look you in the eye and treat you as a human with dignity and respect, creating a safe place when you can, educating somebody about the resources and support. And then just, going back to the beginning of this conversation, the healing journey. Heal yourself. We all go through traumas. We all go through hardships. We all have brains that are rewired and trying to survive. And we have these nervous systems that are holding in all this trauma. Heal and do the healing work, and then share about the healing work and inspire somebody else to do it. And then talk to your kids. I think that's one. My son, I'll give 2 quick examples of how talking to your kids can make a difference. My branding was covered up with another tattoo, but over the years it's faded. So if you look closely, you can still see it needs to be, I'd like to touch it up and cover it. But if you look closely, you can see the lettering in there of my trafficker's name. And my son, he was about 5 years old, and he was looking at the tattoos on my back, and he saw that. And he said, "Mama, what is that?" And I was like, yikes, not ready for this conversation. But I've always been very honest with Christian, to whatever his brain, whatever age he is, what he can understand. And I just said, before your daddy, there was somebody that did bad things to mommy, and that's why that's there. And that seemed to be enough for him. He went back to playing with his Legos, and you could tell his brain was working. And he looked up at me and said, "So that's why you help the sad girls now?" And that's a 5-year-old, a kindergartner, that put that together. And then in 5th grade, 2 years ago, I was driving him to school, and I was doing a law enforcement training that day. And by this point, I had already talked to him about human trafficking, which also means I've talked to him about sex, because I had to explain what sex trafficking is, and he had to understand. And 5th grade is young, but that's fifth graders are being trafficked. So, in very basic terms that he can understand. I don't have to do a full dive into it yet until he's older. And he said, Mom, what are you going to go talk to the cops about today? And I said, human trafficking. And he said, what is that again? And I explained it again in basic terms. And he was looking out the window, and I was kind of waiting for a response. And he goes, so slavery still happens? Whew, a fifth grader understood that trafficking is modern day slavery. And if they can understand that, they can have the conversation. And there's ways to have the conversation from kindergarten to high school and then to college. And all those ages need it. Because we teach kids to stop, drop, and roll, look both ways before crossing the street. Very important things, all to keep them safe. It's needed, but how many kids are experiencing a fire at school versus how many kids are going home on their smartphones talking to predators, being groomed without even knowing it, and being sexually abused and are high risk to being exploited? That conversation has to be had in schools and by the parents, and about keeping them safe, but also their peers safe.
Absolutely. Oh, once again, spot on. I am just 100% right there on literally every word that you are saying. It is so, so impactful. And one of the things that you said that I want to reiterate so our listeners hear this so clearly. Make the phone call to law enforcement if you suspect something. It is better if you're wrong than if you're right and you don't make the phone call. Make the phone call. No matter what, get beyond any fear you have of, well, maybe I'm wrong. Doesn't matter. Who cares if you're wrong? Let's hope you're wrong. We want you to be wrong. Let's hope you're wrong, but make that phone call. Make the phone call. If you have any little red flags, any hairs that stand up in the back of your head, any thoughts that just came to your mind when you heard something, you passed something, you saw something, and a flash came into your heart, went into your head, make the call. Call your local law enforcement. We always emphasize also for people to call the FBI, and it's always surprising to people that they can find their regional number for their FBI by just Googling it, looking in a phone book, searching for it online. They will find that regional number for the FBI. Make that phone call. Call. No matter what, make the call. It's better if you're wrong and make the call than to be right and not make that call. So, Jenna McKaye, thank you so much. You have just filled my heart with so much gratitude for who you are in this world, for what you are doing. You know part of my story. Our listeners know my story. So you are someone out there that I look to as a shero, a hero, a champion. Thank you for all the work you are doing to change people's lives, most importantly, yours, because you are creating a beautiful environment around you.
Thank you.
And you're raising an extraordinary son that is going to keep doing that. You know, that's a legacy. So, Jenna, thank you so much. Thank you for your voice, for being our guest today, and for the important work you are doing. To learn more about the Jenna McKaye Foundation and how you can book Jenna as a speaker, and please do call her right away. Visit her website at jennamckay.com. We will also have links to the topics discussed today on our task force website and links to Jenna's website at our website at yhttf.org. Thank you again, Jenna, and to our listeners, thank you for listening, and thank you for sharing this journey with us.
Join us next week when our guest will be survivor advocate Jessica Kay. If you suspect labor or sex trafficking in the state of Montana, please call 833-406-7867. If you are being trafficked and need help, please call 911. If you suspect labor or sex trafficking outside of the state of Montana, please call your regional FBI office. You may also call the National Human Trafficking Hotline at 888-373-7888.